What I'm doing here, I'm working on a scene of Durango, Colorado, where the RGS meets the Denver and Rio Grande. The RGS comes in from here, and I'm adjusting the colors to bring this hill forward. I'm working on the colors in front and behind this scene. That'll bring it forward. I'm Greg Gray, and we're going to talk about the various approaches to painting a backdrop for your layout. I'll tell you some of the things that I've used over the years that have worked well for me, and I'm sure they will for you also. I'd like to talk a little bit about dark and light and warm and cool. Dark and light is the brightness and intensity of a color, and here I just used black and white to illustrate the different shades that can be made with just those two colors. And this is your darkest dark here and your lightest light, and then all of these are in between shades just made with those two colors, and it gives form and shape to it, but there's no color. Next example would be a cool color, same scene, and it's just one color, and you can see the variation in it. There's the darks and sort of a medium colors and the very lights, and this you would put in distant colors. And then for the warmer colors, and these are just one color mixed with black or white, this is a warm orange color, and you can see the variations in that. And when we're talking about Durango, when I'm saying some colors are warmer in intensity, those are the colors here which have more yellows and oranges and yellows mixed with them. And the cooler colors are the blues and the grays and so forth that are off in a distance. Now everything is on the same plane, but to your eye these should be closer. Objects should be closer because they're warmer and more intense, and these are cooler and further away because they're the blues and the grays, and they're less intense and they reflect less light. Also, another thing to remember, simple, you probably know it already, is that any object you want to appear further away in the painting should have less detail and less intense colors, such as these clouds. And the furthest away are of course the mountains, and they don't show the huge crags and crevices and that. They're just areas of color with little detail and very low cool colors. The closer they are to you, the more detail and the more intense in color. We wanted this flour mill to be more intense and closer up than these mountains, so they're painted warmer, brighter colors, more detail. These ridges the same way. They're warmer in the shadow areas, cooler in the brightly lit areas, and it gives them form. Before we get into the painting bit, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the type of material we'll be using, which would be acrylic paints. They mix with water, clean up with water. They're very versatile and easy to use. They come in the 2-ounce jars or the 4-ounce tubes, and the difference between them, the only thing that will concern us is for like sky colors or something you want to come out completely smooth and not show your brush marks. The liquid that comes in the jars is very good for that. It's a finer grind and it's thin and it spreads out very smooth. That's important in the sky. It isn't important in the actual scene where your mountains and your trees and so forth. And the tube colors are about the consistency of toothpaste, and they will show some brush marks, but that's not important in scenery. And I've been using a brand called Liquitex. I've been using it for about 25 years, and it's a good brand of paint. They don't give me anything for saying that, but I just think it's the best of the colors. Another brand is Hyplar or Grumbacher, and I'd stick with one brand or the other because each manufacturer's paint is just a little bit different. And if you get used to mixing paint from one manufacturer and you switch to another, their, in this case, raw sienna might be completely different than some other manufacturers. And what you expect to get when you mix the colors won't come out the same. So it's just a good idea to stick with one brand. And for a medium to mix with it, you use water, but if you thin it too much with water, it sort of breaks down the content of the paint, so you mix what they call matte medium, which is just a clear, well, it looks milky, but it turns clear when it dries. And this is a good medium to mix with it. It extends your color and doesn't change the color. These trees you see in here, or any of these darks, I use Prussian blue and burnt umber and mix those in various amounts, and they'll either be a very dark when you use more blue or lighter as you use less and more brown. You'll get the mixture if you practice a little bit with it. Usually for the underpainting, when I wash in the colors, I use a color called raw sienna. That's pretty neutral earth color. There is a neutral gray. It's a number 6 they call it. There's a 5 and a 6. 5 and 6 I use all the time. And of course there's plain titanium white, which you use quite a bit of. Raw umber. Cadmium orange. Cadmium yellow. And for the sky, I use phthalo blue. It's a good sky color. It's what you see in most all of the paintings that you'll see in this video. And one other color is a phthalo green, and which is used for these. And I seldom ever use a color pure. I'm always mixing the colors together, so you'll never see any pure one color or another. It's usually a mix of 2 or 3 other colors in there, but those are the basic ones I use. You can add more to it or less, whatever you think. You'll need a palette knife for mixing your colors. I always say don't use your brushes to mix them with because it ruins them, and I'm constantly doing what I tell you not to do, and I get in a hurry and start mixing with my brushes. But it's a better idea not to do that, because if the paint gets down into here, into the furrow, it cakes up in there and sort of ruins the brushes. So I always suggest using a palette knife. I have just a butcher's tray used for meat. You'll see them in meat counters, but it's a wonderful surface to work off of. It's a nice white, and it's slick, and acrylics won't adhere to a slick surface, and it cleans up easily. And then I usually lay my colors out around the edge of the palette and use the center for mixing until it gets too full and you can't tell what you're doing, so you just clean it up again and start over, and you've got a nice mixing surface. Now the brushes, it's good to get good quality brushes, because just like in anything you're doing in model building, you want to have the right tools that'll do the right job. Now these are the least expensive. Those are the white bristle brushes. They're hog bristles, and they're stiff, and they're good for laying in colors, and you need some large brushes, and you'll need a variety of them. So I'd get the big flat ones, and then there's the smaller bristle brushes, and the round brushes for details, and maybe a fan brush for blending colors, and it's also good for making trees and bushes and things like that.
Greg is checking the size of the painting in relation to the models that will be in front of it.
The picture that we're doing from is a photo of Durango, and there's the coaling tower in there, and the flour mill and so forth. And in order to get the perspective and the scale and the size, sometimes what you can do is, this is an HO gauge coaling tower, and we could hold that up in front to judge the size of the background. I also have one here in 1/4 inch scale. I would probably make this larger for this size of a structure. Well, if you haven't done a lot of painting before, or maybe this is your first attempt, when you're going to paint a scene on a huge expanse of white wall like this, sometimes it can be kind of intimidating. And what I would suggest you do is work on a smaller panel of the same scene, which is what we did here. This is just masonite prepared with gesso or white latex paint. And then you draw out your simple shapes on there, and then begin with the simple washes in there and build it up until you get to this stage, which is the final stage. Okay, this is the surface that we'll be painting this Durango scene on, and it's been prepared with an especially prepared painting ground called gesso, Gesso. Now this is a very luminous white surface, and I usually put 4 to 5 coats on, and it can be sanded in between to make it perfectly smooth. You can also use just plain white latex paint, regular house paint, just so it's flat, and you can apply it with a roller. And the main object of it is to get it as smooth as possible so you don't have a lot of pebbly surface. So you use a very soft, fine brush or fine roller and apply it. And then sand between each coat. Well, now you've got the line where the height of your layout is going to be, and then you're going to put your big general spaces on there now. And I'm using quite a few sources. I've got American Narrow Gauge, and I've got some calendars and some other books that have pictures of the Durango yard. And whenever I'm doing a scene that you want to look exactly like, then I want to use good photographs or good books or whatever material I can get so that I can get it as close to possible as the real thing. Now the only thing we're doing in here is breaking up the space. And although there's a lot of details in here, we just want to use big general shapes, not a lot of the fancy detail which won't be used, but it'll just be the big general shapes. And we've got our preliminary painting that we made, so you can use that for reference. And we'll just break up the space as best we can here. And I just use an ordinary pencil to put my lines on there. And I might add a line or two just to get directions where things connect. Put this row of trees going along here. And if I'm not sure of a detail, I'll get, like this calendar will show me a lot of things that I can't see on that painting, to see where the line of trees go and the land mass. So like I say, even though there may be a lot of trees or structures or things in the front, all you want is the big general shape, not details. So now I have some space in here for the land or grassy area down below, and then the first little set of hills that come up, and then the distant mountains. Again, it's just a big shape. And then anything between here and the ceiling is the area for your sky. And think of it as a shape, not as a object. And here are the mountains off in the distance. And right in the niche of this little hill, there's some very distant mountains, snowy mountains. And we just put them in as a big general shape. And you can look at an object and see where it begins here and where it ends here, right in this little notch here. And that'll help you to get the size of the shape. And then the snowy part up here. And then a little bit that's sticking up over the hill here. And this hill comes up and goes on over here, and you might include a line or two in there which will help you orient where it is on your painting. But again, it's just big general shapes. There's a little low hill below it, and then the main ridge that comes across there. And again, just simple lines, just to indicate how much of that space is devoted to hills, and landmass, and so forth. So that you get the proportions correct, it's a good idea to step back from your work every once in a while to see if it really fits the space. Because if you stay up too close to it all the time, it gets distorted, and you can get the overall picture when you stand back. Sometimes you do as much walking as you do painting or drawing, because you're going back and forth to see if it really fits that space and if what you're painting on the wall is really working. So you want to remember to that, step back from your work and observe it, and then go forward. Well, after getting back from this and taking a good look at it, I decided it was too low on the wall. So now is the time to make any changes before you put any paint on there. So I'm just raising it up just a few inches because I think it was a little too low on there, and readjusting these shapes again to so I'm raising it up about that much more, which isn't a lot, but it'll mean something in the end. Now the next step in here, you've got your drawing on and it's placed on the area just as you want it, and the next stage would be to pick out some middle tone of color and wash that in very thin. You're using mostly water and a little paint. In this case, I picked this raw sienna, which is a light earth color, and I'm going to lightly wash it in, and you can see the paint is very transparent and thin, and I'm using my larger brushes. The larger brushes are good because they won't allow you to pick around and do tiny little details. They'll force you to work large areas of color, and that's what you're doing right now, just the larger areas of color in these thin washes. And when I first started painting layouts for different people, I never bothered to explain to them that these preliminary, or the beginning, where you just use these light washes, was an underpainting for the overpainting. I just thought that they knew it, and I think a lot of them were kind of worried when they took a look at this. They thought, my gosh, can't you do any better than that? This is not very good. But in the beginning, these light washes don't look very good. They're just a suggestion of the shape that's going to go on, and you're going to adjust the colors on top of it, and you'll get thicker in some spots and thinner in others. You'll use more pigment and less water and so forth. But this is just a preliminary color, and it gives a very solid feeling to your finished painting. Quite a bit of water and very little pigment. And sometimes only a very small portion of this underpainting shows, but it influences the color that you're putting on top of it.
A touch of raw umber or burnt sienna is added.
The nice thing about acrylics, and some people think it's a drawback, but I think it's an advantage, is that they dry very quickly. And within a few minutes, 10, 15 minutes, depending on how thick or thin you paint, this will be dry enough where you can come back and lay other colors over the top, and they won't bleed or fade into the other color. All I'm doing here is using a little brighter, warmer color. I'm using cadmium yellow, a touch of cadmium orange, and the same raw sienna that's up in here. And I'm putting that right in here because this is actually going to be closer to you, so it's a little stronger in intensity, a little warmer. I've just done the lighter colors. I haven't put any of the darker ones in yet. It'll take more form. But up above here are the very distant hills, but I'm still going to use that raw sienna, but I'm going to dull it down just a little bit with gray and a touch of phthalo blue. Not much, just a very little touch. And when you get a strong color like the blue and you're adding it to the softer earth colors, you want to put just a tiny portion of it in there. Otherwise you'll end up with buckets of color trying to change the blue into the lighter color. So you add just a touch of the blue in there.
Distant mountains can be portrayed using only blues and whites to make them seem far away.
Now we'll put the suggestion of crevices and shapes in there, but since this is off in the distance, there won't be much detail. It'll be mostly just shape and color, and these darker shadow areas represent crags and crevices and we're still not doing any real detailed things. I'm just using the tip end of the brush now rather than the flat side of it. And I want to mix a little more white with it. That blue is a little too strong there because these are supposed to be further back. Now I'm using the side of the brush to spread out there. I'm leaving some of the underpainting show through and just putting the darker highlights on there. And just by dragging it and I'm pulling it across the paint so that some of the other paint shows through. And if I want it to be solid, I'll dip into the paint and get, you know, a little thicker pigment and then dab it on there without pulling it down like that. What I want to do here, I'm going to add the snow that's on the tops of the mountains. And you could use pure white, but actually there's just the slightest tint of sunlight on there, and it gives it a sort of a warm, bright glow if you just add a very dot of cadmium orange. And then come back with almost pure white and put a few highlights on there. Now I'm going to mix up the color for the sky, and I always use the jar paints because, as I mentioned, they're a thinner grind and much smoother, and when you paint them out they won't show brush marks. And when you do the skies you need large amounts of white and small amounts of blue. And I've poured a little bit out in this container, and I'll add the phthalo blue to it. But when you're putting, like I say, a stronger color with a weaker one, you want to use just a little blue and see how it goes, and then add a little more blue, and you keep doing that till you get the shade that you want. I guess you can see that now. Now this would be the very pale blue that would be down near the horizon line. And I'm using no water with this at all. It's just the two colors together, the white and the blue, phthalo blue. And I'm starting out here where the sky meets the mountains. And of course down there it's almost a pale white and very little blue. And as you go up, it gets darker in blue. And these jar colors, they flatten out real well. And there are practically no brush marks left. You can at this stage worry about clouds, but you don't have to. Most times I wait until the sky is completely in to worry about clouds, but sometimes you can take your brush and mix it in with the blue while it's still wet and give a hint of clouds. And after that dries, come back and add your more opaque touches of white and blue and cadmium colors to make the clouds form and billowy and so forth.
For painting large areas of sky, a large soft 3 or 4 inch brush will come in very handy.
This looks more like a house painter than a regular painter, but for the sky it works well.
We'll come back to more cloud painting later. This is another adjustment Greg made to his original outline of a hill. After studying the pictures and stepping back from the wall, it was determined that the size was just not right. We wanted to show that even though the undercoat had been applied, don't hesitate to go back and paint over something if it makes it right.
Right now I'm just building up the shadow areas to get the shape of the terrain just a little better. And again, this is still rough, and at the last minute or so it's all pulled together. There's a number of ways you can do it, but I usually just blend the colors together, soften them at the edges, take away the real hard edges. And you do that by laying one color next to the other and then feathering it out. A line like that would probably be too harsh. tree lines and the shadows they create, and the deep dark shadow areas, like in behind this feature. When I start to fill that out with colors, that'll bring that forward and push that back. And you constantly want to be stepping back, taking a look at what you just did, and it'll help if you look at it and you kind of squint your eyes, and it'll bring the darks and lights out to you and tell you where it needs to be darker and needs to be lighter. And that's what you do throughout the whole painting, is just adjust colors from light to dark, dark to light, and eventually it begins to take on more shape, and you start to see it come around. Right now I'm mixing up a little burnt sienna, raw sienna, and little cadmium orange. Sometimes even your brush strokes suggest erosion or hillsides or rocks, and if they do suggest that to you, go ahead and use them. Here's a cut going down, the road goes down here, and there's a cut, and so we're going to make that, or try to bring that out. When you get your darker colors in there, your darker, more opaque tones, and suddenly that underpainting starts to make it have form. And you see all this little, how the brush made all these little things, or you can build up on them and make that into, make it work. Now I know by dragging it that's going to happen, so I do that a lot of times, but somebody else might not be used to doing that, and but it's kind of a neat thing. And at first I used to do it by accident, and then I realized what was happening, and I made it work all the time.
Lighter shades of gray are used to make the painting appear three-dimensional.
When we were working on this, we were just blocking in the big general shapes and doing some detail. Now I've got most of this with secondary painting or overpainting to bring out some of the lights and shadows and the grasses and the lights and darks in there, and the trees, the hillsides, and then up in the main mountains, the distinctive shapes and folds to the hills behind Durango. When you don't have to be so specific, you can just do general things that look realistic but aren't following any particular scene. I prefer to work from a photograph of the real thing and go out on the site and take a picture of it, work from that. It's just like working from plans to build a car or a locomotive or something. It's much nicer and easier to work from a plan than it is to just make it up. Although when you're working on some things, you might have to stretch it out a little bit and add some things that aren't really there, but once you take the subject matter away from the model or the painting, nobody will know the difference. If you don't have a photo of it right there, nobody will know that one valley or one line is not exactly where it should be. For these close-up hills here, I'm using, there's two grays that there's a number 5 and a number 6. The 5 is the darker and the 6 is the lighter. And in those grays, I'll add like raw sienna or just a touch of yellow ochre in the lighter part, and in the darker part, I'll add a touch of blue, just small, very small amounts, but just enough to shade it and give it a look to it.
Highlighting the edge of this mountain helps to separate it from the sky.
This is for the underpainting for the mountain. It's phthalo blue and white and a deep red, almost a purple. They just call it cadmium red deep. Combination of those two. You'll have to experiment with it, and then you put a touch of white with it, and it turns the right shade. And a lot of this color that I'm using for underpainting, not much will show through, but it still gives the mountain a very solid feeling, and the highlights coming through won't look the same if you just stick them on later.
We jump to another backdrop to show a mountain that is farther away than those at Durango.
Same thing, just more blue and a bit of burnt umber in there. You know, it just turns it a little darker. But I still take that dark and occasionally mix it with what light I had before, so that some areas are not, you know, it's not all the same color. You know, and you always want to vary it so that it's not, well, the light won't hit a mountain evenly anyway. You know, there's so many crags and crevices and stuff that you want it to be uneven and the color sort of mottled. The only thing is this mountain is pretty distant, so you know, it's not going to have as much definition as one that's up close, but it will have big general ones, you know, and that's what we're trying to get here. There'll be some lighter and darker patches no matter what you do. I'm just kind of scrubbing it in here. Same color, just spread out a little more. We've blocked in all the color on the mountains that are in the distance, and they still need to have a little misty look to them. They're a little too intense. So I made up a color that consists of phthalo blue, white, and raw umber. About 50-50 on the white and the phthalo blue, and just a touch of raw umber, and plenty of matte medium. And this is what we call a glaze. The matte medium thins it out and makes it more transparent than it is. And we'll put that glaze on this mountain, and it'll soften all the colors and push it back in distance. And at first, when you apply it, it looks kind of misty and a little more white than you think it's going to be. But when it dries a little clearer. And I don't know if there's enough in here to really come out all that clear and show you, but you'll probably notice that the colors are now less intense, and it looks like that mountain is further back and in the mist. And I'm adding a bit more white to what little of this is left, and more matte medium. And there is one thing about applying this matte medium. You can't go over it too many times. As soon as it starts to dry, in order for it not to get more cloudy than it is, you'll want to stop. And don't go back and forth over it more than maybe 1 or 2 times. Now this mountain is further back in distance. I'm going to do some trees in this area here, and there are several brushes that work really well for it. I'll show you the brushes first, and then I'll do a few trees. This little brush here is called a script liner brush, and it has a very long bristles on it, and they're thin and soft and round, and they'll make things come to a real nice point. This brush is also round, but it's only good for the thicker part of the trunk. When you get up to the branches or the very thin part, this script liner brush is what you want to use, and you'll be amazed how easy it is and how much fun it is to do a fancy tree. Now there's another kind of brush, and these are bristle brushes, but they're sable, or a combination of sable and synthetic. This one is actually for lettering, but it has a fine flat edge, and it works out really nice for foliage on a tree. Same way with this flat edge, and that's what I paint with, this flat edge. You mix the paint up fairly liquid and roll the brush in it to load it up with paint. Press down and pull up, and press down and pull up. You have to keep going back to get paint because it doesn't hold a lot. And I usually work from the bottom and then up, and then that tree will be thick at the bottom, and as you go up you leave off pressure. And just like that. If you want it to be thicker at the bottom, you use a thicker round brush, and you can start the trunk off with it. And then as you get higher, switch to the script brush, like so. And it's also good if you, for putting limbs on a tree. And just don't try to be too careful with it. Just let it do its work by pulling out on a real quick motion. You use your it's just a light tap. Now this is the little lettering brush with the flat tip. And when you use it, you're just using the tip end of it, not the whole brush. And you just start out at the bottom and work your way up. And as you get up, you have less paint in it. And it also becomes lighter, which is the way it is on a tree. But you can see it makes the job a lot easier for you, because this little chiseled flat edge, if you just tap it against the painting, comes out looking like branches on an evergreen tree or a regular tree, depending what you're doing. After that dries out, you can go back and put a few more on there, here and there, fill out the tree. Sometimes you only see a part of a tree. They're not all standing all by themselves, so you put lots of trunks, but you don't have to carry them all the way up. You just do part of it. And it's a lot easier to make a woods full of trees with a brush than it is to build them.
Use a round-edged brush called a filbert for bushes.
Even though I'm going to cover up almost all these branches, I'm going to make them anyway. Sometimes one or two of them show through, and all the branches don't have to really be connected to the tree. Just they can just be out there. The leaves will cover the holes. And put that in first. And be sure to let some air show through the tree, because trees are not solid there. And plenty of air space around them and through them. Sometimes what looks right against the palette doesn't look right when you get it up here. That's the darkest tone, and there's some of the middle tone. Of course, the higher up in the tree, the more light it's going to catch, so therefore you put your lighter colored leaves and branches up towards the top.
Now that we've seen how to paint an individual tree, let's see how Greg makes a small forest.
On this scene here, we're going to wash in. We've already washed in the hillsides in the sepia tone or raw sienna colors. But I've started some darker color, and the reason I picked this out, it's going to be for the green trees and the yellow aspens. And the reason I start with this dark color, which is part phthalo green and part burnt sienna, and some of it's burned umber and Prussian blue, but it's a warm and it's a dark green. And when you do your aspens, they're a real pale yellow, depending on the time of the year, or a sort of an orangish yellow. And in order to make that work real well and come out, you want to work off a nice warm dark surface, and that's what this sort of dark green surface will do for you. And we'll let this, as I get up a little higher in the aspen grove, I get a little lighter, still the warm green, but just a little lighter. And I cover most of the area where I think the aspens are going to be. And I'm just using the side of my brush and kind of tapping it in. And that way it leaves uneven areas of color that sort of resemble leaves or bushes or trees. And you can vary the color, some spots darker than others, just to add a little more of the dark blue or the dark umber, which is a brown. Especially along the lower side, which is where the light would be the least bright on the trees, especially where it meets the ground. Well, now we're ready to apply the details to this underpainting that we've put on there for the aspen trees. And I've put in a few trunks of various colors with the white and this handy little script brush. And now it's time to put some foliage in there over this dark color, which will help the lighter foliage work. And I've got cadmium orange deep and cadmium orange medium and cadmium yellow light and cadmium yellow medium. And I've mixed them, some of them together. We use very little water and just a lot of pigment, and you kind of tap your brush on there so that the marks that you leave are more or less see-through and transparent. But you begin to see how that nice dark background makes the yellow work immediately. We'll go for some of the lighter colors right up at the tip where it reaches the mountain. And actually some of these trees haven't turned yellow yet. They're still partially green. So we mix a little of the green with the same yellow and apply that. And this is just a plain old bristle brush. It's not any fancy brush, but I'm just mostly using the tip end of it. Well, this about finishes up this picture here, except for a few lines here and there. Maybe we'll strengthen some of the shadows near the trees or bring out some of the brighter strokes that we put in. This is the Graydon Flour Mill, which is a very important landmark behind this particular railroad yards. So I'm going to put it on here so it'll be easily identifiable. And I have to reduce it a little bit so it'll be about the right size for this distance. And this is one of the few times I use a straight edge or a ruler to try to get some of these buildings correct. I'm not that steady, so I have to use a ruler. And after I get just the big general shapes in, then I'll let the paint do most of the work and do the shadows and the highlights. And the best way to do that is just each shape is related to the next, and that's the way I just kind of eyeball it in. Look for certain reference points. I accidentally made the trees over a little too far, but that's all right. We'll paint right over them. It won't make any difference. And there's going to have to be some trees behind it anyway. It just makes it a little harder for me to see where the buildings are actually going to go. Even at that, I try to make the lines as light as possible so I don't have, in case I make a mistake, which is highly possible, then I won't have so much trouble to remove it. All right, at the moment here, I'm just laying in some color on this ranchway feed building, and the easiest way to do it is think of the way the light hits it, and then put all your darks in and go back and put your lights in, and the building takes shape pretty quickly that way. Right now you're just interested in darks and lights. If there are any windows or doors, you can put them on afterwards. On this feed mill, I'm just zeroing in on the main features like the name on there, the ranchway feeds and so forth, and just the main shapes. I'm not worrying about all of the details on there, just try to get most of the windows close to where they belong, the ones I can see, and maybe these vents that are on here, I'll put them on this roof. And the relationship of this building to the actual backdrop is important. You know, I wouldn't want to put it way down here when it actually belongs here, but you could vary things like that. In this case, we're trying to do this picture as close to the real thing as possible. Now this house doesn't have very much detail, but it is in the on the actual hill in that area, and so I just put it up there and put the simple sides and ends and the little roof. And the way I made it stand out is to put some dark trees behind it, emphasize the shadow under the roof, and put a few dark bushes here and there in front of it. And this makes that little house, you know, pop out. I've just got 4 brushes here. I usually use a bristle brush, and these are like a couple of 4s, a 6, and an 8. Size doesn't make that much difference, but bristle brushes are good. And sometimes to smooth it out, I'll later use a fan brush or a brush that has some sable in it. Well, we'll just start out here, and clouds are not just one color alone. As you can see, I've made several different shades. There's just pure white there, but there's white with a touch of cadmium orange in it, and white with a touch of cadmium orange and yellow in there. And then there's white with cerulean blue and a touch of raw umber and a little white with it, and various mixes adding just a tad more maybe of red with that same blue and gray mix. So there's a variety of colors here.
Clouds make the ground stand out.
The other thing to remember is your source of sunlight. In this case, the sun is coming from the right side, so most of the clouds will be, the highlights will be on the right side of the cloud. The clouds also have a tendency to help the sky blend together in case there's some rough edges. No matter how hard I try, I usually get a few edges that need to be smoothed out, and I'll do that by breaking that edge up with clouds. And you can also vary the size of the clouds, some larger than others. The tiny small ones that you'll put in will put it in the viewer's eye that, of course, since they're smaller, they must be further back then. And the bigger they get, the closer they should be to you. And I just use a sort of a scrubbing motion. The paint goes on thick at first, and then as it gets thinner and thinner, and I have less on my brush, then I spread it out and make the further back clouds or the more transparent. In this scene there's a field and it's full of rocks, and rather than try to paint each individual rock, there's a technique called spattering, and you just make the paint so it's very liquid and wet, and then protect the rest of the drawing, and then run your finger across the brush and it'll splatter bits of paint there. And don't worry if it's uneven or anything like that. You just come back and smooth out some of the things and pick some of them up if they're too big. a dry brush, you apply it to that and it'll pick it right up if it's too big for the area. But it's one way of getting texture real fast. The only thing you want to make sure is that you don't make your paint too liquid or you'll have a million runs down there. You want to make it so it's, once it splatters, it dries. And then after it dries, we'll take a little round brush and add some highlights to it. You can use lighter colors, add a little oranges and ochres and things to the color you've just applied, and then you can make rocks with shadows. We'll have to wait till it dries a little more. These are going to be the final touches on this painting, and I'm going to bring out a few details that close up here, some rocks and some of the shapes that are suggested that look like rocks. We'll make some shadows on them and give them a little form. There are several little areas in here that I sort of left without color that would suggest rocks. And for some of the shadows, you want to use fairly transparent washes so you don't cover up the whole thing, but just suggest dark shadows. And they can be warm shadows also. They don't have to be black. They can be brown shadows or warm colored shadows. And the one trick for doing rocks is that the space behind the rock can be darkened to make the rock come forward. Like this big rock here, if I put a little darker shadow behind it, then it comes forward, and also what's in front of it. And you don't have to outline it, but just make the background behind it darker. And these are the shadow areas, and that would be Prussian blue and burnt umber. And this is the medium green, which is ultramarine and cadmium yellow. And then these are the lighter areas, which is a lot more. You just take a section of that, put it here, and put a lot more of the bright yellow and a tad of cadmium orange. And then for the brightest highlights, I used a light yellow mixed with some of this. And so then you can get the gradations of color. And along the bottom here, we'll put some dark foliage for bushes and small trees and things, tall grass. Again, this is just the shadow color. It's not the final color. And some shadows are darker than others. And the dark underpainting that you put down helps to show that lighter color off. And by tapping your brush on there, you don't cover up all of the underpainting. Some of it shows through, and looks like shadow color underneath it. Now we'll go with a little more cadmium orange and a little more yellow, and we'll get to the next lighter green, and you should be able to see this. And it goes mostly on the upper branches, but some of it goes down below where you can really, some of the light would hit it.
The supports for our curved corner consists of a piece of 3/4-inch plywood that has been cut with a 3-foot radius arc, leaving a 90-degree angle to mount against the wall. A radius as small as 2 feet could be used. The plywood is mounted to the wall with 4 pieces of 1x2 and an additional screw on each end. The 1x2s are held with a single screw going into the stud. It is quite secure. Check to see that the plywood is level, both on the x-axis and the y-axis. This will make mounting the masonite much easier. Use 2 of these plywood supports. We need to know the distance between them and the distance from a reference point at the top. Draw a line from the middle of the plywood straight out from each end. The masonite measures 3 feet high by 4 feet 9 inches wide. We used a disc sander and a drill to bevel the back edges that will be mounted against the wall. This is a quick process that will make blending the edges of the masonite to the walls much easier. This is approximately how the beveled edge should look to give a smooth transition to the wall. Push the masonite into place so that it conforms to the supports underneath. Here is where those pencil marks and measuring come into play. After measuring from the top of the masonite to the top support and then to the bottom support, a blue line was popped so we would know where to place nails or screws. You definitely will need help in holding up the masonite. Using the same joint compound that is used for drywall, put 1 coat over the joint, followed by a strip of wet drywall tape, and work it into place. Using a putty or drywall knife, work the tape into the joint compound to drive out the bubbles. Add an additional layer of compound and sand. And here is our finished corner ready for painting. A curved corner takes away the harsh edge of a 90-degree corner and preserves the illusion that your backdrop is one continuous scene.
There is one thing that you might think of when you're doing the backdrops is there are some little mini scenes or points of interest that kind of lead your eye in and through the painting. Well, of course, the one, and that's a landmark for this particular area, is the flour mill. And on the right side you see some little rocks and little road or a path or something in there. And then up in a little above that, there's the mountains peeking through the distant mountains with a little bit of snow on them still left in there. And over the birds in the sky and so forth. At the top of this next large peak right next to the mountains, there's an interesting where the land is eroded away and it's brighter and warmer in color than the parts below it. The same way with this particular peak, it's a land formation. Everybody could identify the area by. And then off to the left is a little mini scene of the bridge. And this is another thing you might think of when you're doing a backdrop. If you want to feature a three-dimensional model in front, if it's a light model, like the bridge is light, you want to place it against a dark backdrop. You can also make the eye follow certain things, like the road from the bridge on brings you into the scene. The next stopping point would be the tall tree, and then the next point of interest would be the Graydon flour mill, and then the next point of interest would be the tall mountain in the background, sort of a mesa, and then on to the next point. It leads you in and around, leads your eye in and around the scene.